Hi, everybody. So today we're going to read a book called Ruby's Wish. And our reading focus is going to be on character traits throughout the story. But in this specific story, we're going to look at the interactions of characters. So in the story, there's a young woman, a young little girl, who turns into a woman in the story. Her name is Ruby, and her grandfather. And so we're going to look at their interaction throughout the story, meaning how the communication, what do they do, what are their actions, what do they say to each other, okay? And how is Ruby's character traits throughout the story? Okay, so how does she deal with different things? Is she brave? Is she courageous? So what are her different characteristics throughout the story? So as a part of analyzing characters, we look at what they do, how they respond to conflict, and what they are thinking. So as I'm reading the story, I really want you guys to hone in on that. How does she respond to conflict? And that will tell you her character trait, what they are thinking. So as she's thinking about things that are happening to her, how does she react? And that tells a lot about a person. We also look at how they interact with other people in their lives. So specifically in this story, it's her grandfather. But in your life, it could be your interactions between your parents and your siblings or your friends, right? And your character traits on how you handle different situations, what you do, how you respond to conflict, what you're thinking. And here are, give me one quick second so I can flip my screen. Here are some different character traits that you might be familiar with. The first one is assertive. And assertive means having or showing a conflict or forceful personality. So this could be somebody who maybe might be aggressive, might be a little too confident, right? They're very assertive. They're always going in on conversations and cutting you off and might be a little aggressive, right? Bossy. Some of you guys might be able to relate to this type of character trait, right? Maybe you've seen somebody who's really bossy, tells other people what to do this, do that, right? Orders them around. Brave, ready to face danger, showing courage. Caring, interested, or concerned about what happens to others. Cautious, takes care to avoid danger or trouble. You're very cautious. You're constantly looking around, making sure you're not going to be in danger. Cheerful, full of cheer, happy and good-natured. Clever, quick to learn, thinks creatively. So as I'm saying these words, I want you guys to think about these words as I'm reading the story. Competitive, having a strong desire to win or do better than others. Considerate, thinks of the needs and feelings of others. Cooperative, willing to work together with others. So these are all character traits that you might see in different characters in a book. So we are going to focus on that for our reading focus. How does Ruby interact with the characters in the book? And what kind of character traits can you define for her in the book? Ruby's Wish. By Sharon Yim Bridges. If you walk down a certain road in a certain city in China, past the pet market, with its yellow and green rice bird hopping in their bamboo cages, and the goldfish and the terrapins in their porcelain bowls, you will come to a block of houses, 5 houses wide and 7 houses deep. Many families live here now, and the buildings are brown with age and dirt. But if you look closely, you will see that once upon a time, this was all one house, the significant home of one family. So here is the village, or the house. So this was some family lived in this whole thing. The house was built by an old man who returned from the Gold Mountain. That was what the Chinese called California, when many men left to join the gold rush. There and few came back again. But as I said, this man did come back, and he came back very rich. And he did what rich men did in old China. He married many wives. His wives had many sons, and these sons also had many wives. So at one time, the house was filled with shrieks of laughter, all of over 100 children. So with all those wives and his sons having wives, so there was 100 children that lived in this home. Wow, it's a lot. Amongst these children was a little girl that everyone called Ruby because she loved the color red. In China, red is the color of celebration. One New Year's Day, children received red envelopes full of good luck money. Brides wear red on their wedding days, but Ruby insisted on wearing red every day, even when her mother made her wear somber colors like all her other cousins. Ruby would tie up her jet black hair with a red ribbon. So even though her mom said, no, you're going to have to wear something a little bit darker, right? No red today, she would still tie up her hair with red ribbons. Because he had so many grandchildren, Ruby's grandfather hired a teacher to come to the house. Any grandchildren who wanted to learn could join the classes. This was unusual in China in those days, when most girls were never taught to read or write. Whenever the weather was fine, classes were held in the garden. The windows of Ruby's grandfather's office opened into the garden. Often he would rise from his desk to gaze out of his windows at his grandchildren. One day, Ruby's grandfather looked down from his window to see the high white walls of the garden plastered with calligraphy. His grandchildren had been practicing their handwriting. Ruby's grandfather laughed to see that many had smudged ink on their hands and faces. So you can see that in the picture here. Little smudges of ink all over them. Then he noticed a sheet that was more beautiful than the rest. Which of his grandchildren had produced such wonderful calligraphy? Down in the garden, the teacher was praising Ruby. Her ears were turning as bright red as her jacket. Oh, so what does that say about her? When her cheeks were going red, what does that mean? What does that mean? What kind of character trait does that show her as? Maybe she's just a little shy, right? And it says here, and the example is her ears were turning as red as her jacket. So that's the evidence to that. But if Ruby was doing as well as her boy cousins in her studies, she had to work much harder. When the boys had finished their studies for the day, they were free to play. But the girls had to learn about cooking and keeping house. In fact, as far as their mothers were concerned, these were the only things girls had to learn. One by one, the girls stopped going to the classes, all except Ruby. She would catch up on her embroidery at night. Many nights, her candle flickered long after everyone else had gone to bed. So I see another character trait here that describes her. What do you guys think? What kind of character trait is that when you work hard, right? And you're working harder than anybody else, right? That character trait is a hard worker, right? That's a great character trait. One day, the children were asked to write a poem. Ruby wrote, "Alas, bad luck to be born a girl. Worse luck to be born into this house where only boys are cared for. So that's what that says here. Ruby's teacher was very impressed by the poem. He showed it to Ruby's grandfather. Ruby's grandfather was also impressed, but he was worried about what the poem said. He summoned Ruby to his office. So that shows another character trait in Ruby, right? That she is opening up and saying that it's not fair that she's being treated differently, right? And a lot of girls in those days did not make a fuss about it. They just kept to themselves. So that shows the character trait of bravery. Ruby found her grandfather sitting in his chair. Her poem spread open on his desk. "Did you write this poem?" asked Ruby's grandfather. "Yes, I did, grandfather," answered Ruby. "Do you think that in this house we only care for boys?" "Oh no, grandfather," said Ruby, very sorry that she had upset him. "You take care of all of us, and for that we are all grateful." "Little Ruby," her grandfather said gently, "I really would like to know why you wrote this poem. How are the boys better looked at after?" "Well," said Ruby, trying to think of a small, unimportant thing. "When it is the moon festival and we are each given half a moon cake, the boys always get the half with the yellow moon yolk." Her grandfather said, as if he were still waiting. "Is that so?" "Yes," continued Ruby. "And when it is the lantern festival, the girls are given simple paper lanterns, but the boys have red lanterns in the shapes of goldfish, cockerels, and dragons." Ruby's grandfather chuckled. He never thought about it before. He could imagine how much Ruby would have liked a red lantern. "But most importantly," said Ruby, staring hard at her red shoes, "the boys will get to go to university, but the girls will be married." "Don't you want to be married?" asked her grandfather. "You know, you are very lucky. A daughter of this house can marry any man." "I know, grandfather," she said, "but I'd much rather go to university." Ruby's grandfather touched her hair. "Thank you for talking to me, Ruby," he said. "Go on with your lessons. Make the most of them while you can." So Ruby went on with her lessons. Some of the boys grew up and went away to university. Some stayed in the house and started families of their own. But when they grew up, all the girls were married and sent away to live in their husbands' homes. Ruby knew it would soon be her turn. In the ponds, Ruby could see the orange and white carp gulping for breath under a thin layer of ice. It would soon be Chinese New Year's. Ruby felt sure it would be her last one at home. Oh, so she thinks she's going to be married off. On New Year's Day, Ruby put on red velvet shoes and tied her red ribbon in her hair. Then she went to wish everyone a happy new year. She started with her married cousins, then worked her way up through the parents, aunts, and uncles. Each one gave her a red packet full of lucky money. Finally, she bowed before her grandfather. "Good luck and prosperity, grandfather," she said. "Good luck, little Ruby," replied her grandfather, and he handed her a very fat red packet. Ruby could feel the eyes of all her family on her as she opened the red, lucky envelope. Can you guess what was in it? It wasn't money. It was something much better than that. Oh, what do you guys think it is? It was a letter from a university saying that they would be proud to accept Ruby as one of their very first female students. So that's how Ruby got her wish. It's a true story. And how do I know this? Well, Ruby is my grandmother, and every day she still wears a little red. The end. All right, guys, for this activity, you guys received this worksheet in the last supply pickup. So you can write it directly on this worksheet or you can type it in Seesaw. It's completely up to you. So we talked at the beginning of this lesson about character traits and the different types of character traits that you might see in somebody, or maybe in a character in a book or a movie, right? So we're going to be focusing on Ruby's character traits. You can also focus on the grandfather's character traits that you saw in him throughout the story. So either one, you could do both. Maybe you could do 2 character traits for Ruby, 2 character traits for the grandfather. Completely up to you. I'm going to focus on Ruby, and then also I'm going to do 1 for Ruby and 1 for the grandfather. And then you guys need to come up with 2 more on your own. So not only do you have to come up with a character trait, but you also have to come up with some evidence. What happened in the story? How can you support your claim that they have this character trait with evidence from the book, from the story? The first one I want to focus on that I noticed right away from Ruby was that she was very determined throughout the story. She was determined with her schoolwork. She was determined to be the best that she could be. She was determined because she would work, all night to complete her chores or complete different things that she was supposed to do. So that shows me that she's a very determined person. And specifically, I was thinking of when she would stay up all night here. Here's the scene in the book. And it says she would stay up while the other girls stopped going to class. She was the only one that kept going to class, except for her. She would catch up on her embroidery at night. So she would stay up at night to do her embroidery, while other girls have decided to not take class anymore, and they were doing these things during the day. Okay, so she was very determined. So she continued to go to class while other girls didn't. So you may type this character trait in or write it on your worksheet. So you can copy exactly what I have and also the evidence. So pause the video and do this one, okay? And then we'll go on to the next one. All right, the next one I'm gonna look at is I'm actually gonna look at her grandfather. And so I'm gonna put it right here because it's right next to him. That her grandfather, he was very loving, or I'm gonna say caring, right? Because he actually really cared about how Ruby felt. So when she completed that sign, when she wrote that sign, let me find that page real quick. When she wrote that sign here, he was very concerned because the message was that she had bad luck being born a girl. And he wanted to know why she felt that way. So he cared about Ruby's feelings. Throughout the story. Now I can go further and I can talk about how he called her into his office and they discussed why she felt that way. But I don't have a whole lot of room on this box. So I'm just going to put that he cared about Ruby's feelings throughout the story. So if you want to copy this one down, you can. So pause the video and copy it down. All right, now you guys have 2 more to do, only 2. So think of either 2 more characteristics that you noticed in Ruby throughout the story, or 2 characteristics in the grandfather, maybe 1 of each, totally up to you. You can do whatever you want. And don't forget your evidence, okay? How does that support, what did you see in the book? What happened in the book that supports that characteristic? Good luck with this and your guys' secret password for watching this video is rain. Rain.